I'm going to be talking about two cases in which I'm involved, and want to begin by disclosing that I'm co-counsel for Antoine Jones in United States versus Jones with Steve LaCar. In the Jones case, the police federal officials put a GPS device on the underside of Antoine Jones's car without his knowledge or consent and without a valid warrant. And they then used that device to track the movements of the car, registered to his wife, driven some by her and some by Jones, for the next 30 days, taking a snapshot every 10 seconds of the location of the car and uploading this information, which informs it could be digitized and searched in various ways. There was a warrant which was concededly not valid. It wasn't executed within the period of the warrant. It wasn't executed within the District of Columbia. The evidence obtained as a result of the locational information was introduced at his trial on drug charges. He was convicted and appealed. The Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, in an opinion by Judge Ginsburg, held that this was a search that should have required a warrant. The government argues, and first attempted to get en banc review, which the court denied, though over a dissent by Judge Silberman. And the government argued that under the court's precedents, no warrant is needed, that there's no Fourth Amendment issue raised by this, because it's not a search, it's not a violation of the Fourth Amendment, because all the information that was actually introduced at trial was on could be observed from public thoroughfares. And the court relied upon an earlier case, or the government relies upon an earlier case from the 80s, United States versus Knotts, where the government placed a beeper in a container with the permission of the owner of the container. The beeper was placed in a container, and the container was taken by the suspect, and they used the beeper to follow the car. And the court held in that case that no warrant was required because it simply aided monitoring on a public street, and that there's no expectation of privacy when you're on a public thoroughfare. The argument that this was much more extensive than that, because it involved 30 days worth of data taken every 10 seconds, did not persuade Judge Silberman, who would have granted en banc review. He said an infinite number of incidences times 0 is 0. That is, if there's no right of privacy being observed on a public thoroughfare, the fact that you're observed every 10 seconds makes no difference, and would have granted en banc review. The government petitioned the Supreme Court for cert there. The circuits have taken a variety of different positions on this question, and cert was granted. So part of the issue is going to be, is the GPS device any different from a beeper? Beeper is good for a few hundred yards, maybe a bit more depending on the quality of the beeper, and it aids the actual visual tracking, so you have to have a human actually doing this. And in one sense, the GPS device is actually seizing the information itself. We also added, when we opposed the grant of certiorari, we also added a conditional second question. We said that if the court were to grant cert, it ought to grant on a second question as well, which is whether the government violated the respondent's Fourth Amendment rights by the act of attaching the GPS tracking device to his vehicle without his consent. That's a separate sort of property-based interest that they did. They seize his vehicle and then use it as a transmitting beacon device against him, and should that result in or trigger exclusion of the fruit of the poison tree. In terms of, one of the arguments is you may understand that your neighbor can observe you on a public street when you leave the house. What you cannot expect is that your neighbor will attach a GPS device under your car and use 3 satellites to track your every movement.
You must live in
in that sense, I'll just close the discussion of this by saying that in the effort to show how different this technology is from the use of a beeper or the use of binoculars or whatever, our work in progress brief that has to be submitted soon begins. In 1978, the United States Department of Defense launched the Navigational Satellite Timing and Ranging Global Positioning System, or GPS, for use of the U.S. military. The system operates through 25 government-owned satellites orbiting the Earth, each of which continuously transmits the position and orbital velocity of every satellite in the system. The receiver on a GPS device listens to the transmissions of the 4 closest satellites, and through a process known as trilateralization, determines its precise location on Earth. The device provides an accurate, continuous, and 3-dimensional digital record of its position and velocity over any given period of time, as well as that of any person or object carrying the device. The data is communicated to a remote computer, translated onto an interactive map, manipulated to generate a range of personal information about the individual's activities, including their home, social, and work activities. If it is used for a prolonged period of time, it will produce a pattern of locational and information and movement for every moment in that period. So which of these things is not like the others?